Could you survive a night in a Victorian bed? It would seem that it's not that difficult. But surviving a night in the Victorian era was not as easy as it seems. Imagine the Victorian era. Lavish dresses, elegant gentlemen, candlelit balls, and stately mansions. This image, created by books and films, beckons with its romanticism and sophistication. But behind this facade lay a reality devoid of our modern comforts, especially when it came to sleep. The bedroom, which we consider a personal sanctuary of rest, was a place of hardship in those days. It held secrets that are not shown in costume dramas. A night in a Victorian bed was not so much a rest as a daily struggle for survival. Watch this video to the end to find out why sleeping in a bed that looked luxurious at first glance could be a real challenge, and how the bedroom reflected the silent position of women in society. What if I told you that everything you believed about the Victorian bedroom was untrue? We are used to thinking of the bedroom as a purely personal, intimate space. But in the Victorian era, this was far from the case, especially for women. The bedroom of a wealthy family was not just a place to sleep, but another room for displaying status. Close friends or relatives could come in to admire the expensive furniture and decorations. Privacy was a luxury not available to everyone. For women, the bedroom was an extension of their work area. Here, they not only slept, but also changed clothes, groomed themselves, and often did needlework. It was a space where they prepared themselves to go out into society, obeying its strict rules. In less affluent families, personal space was out of the question. Several family members could sleep in one room, separated only by thin screens. The idea of the bedroom as a refuge from the world was alien to most people at that time. It was here that the oppression of women began to manifest itself. Her right to personal space was minimal. The bedroom belonged to her husband, her family, but least of all to her. This room witnessed her silent service. From maintaining perfect order to fulfilling her marital duties, everything happened here. The bedroom was not a place of rest for her, but a place of duty. Even the bed, the central element of the room, was more a symbol of the family's status than a place of comfort. Its size and decorations spoke of her husband's wealth. The woman's personal preferences in choosing a bed were not taken into account. We would be very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about how the lack of personal space affects a person? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about what Victorians actually slept on? Modern orthopedic mattresses would shock a Victorian. Their beds were far from our idea of comfort, posing a real challenge for the back. In wealthy homes, mattresses were stuffed with horsehair, wool, or feathers. These materials were considered a luxury, but even they would eventually clump together into dense, hard lumps. To keep the mattress in good condition, it had to be regularly shaken and fluffed. In simpler families, mattresses were stuffed with straw, dry leaves, or even fabric scraps. Such fillings quickly became compacted, turning the bed into something resembling a stone bed. Sleeping on such a mattress was like sleeping on the ground. Caring for a mattress was a separate, difficult task that fell on the shoulders of women or servants. The massive, heavy mattress had to be taken outside, beaten to remove dust, and dried. It was an exhausting routine chore. Of course, no one had heard of breathable materials and hypoallergenic fillers. Mattresses absorb dust, moisture, and odors, becoming a breeding ground for problems. The idea that a mattress could be easily cleaned or replaced would have seemed fantastic. A hard bed was considered not only the norm, but also beneficial to health. Soft beds were associated with laziness, pampering, and even moral decay. Harsh sleeping conditions were supposed to strengthen character and body. For women, a hard mattress was another reminder of their lot in life. They were required to be resilient in everything, in running the household, in bearing children, in serving their husbands. Even nighttime rest did not bring complete relaxation, but was a continuation of the hardships of the day. Now that we know how hard the bed was, the question of warmth arises. How did people keep warm in cold, unheated bedrooms? In the next chapter, you will learn about a simple but sometimes dangerous device that replaced central heating. The secret hidden behind closed bedroom doors was that the bed was not just a piece of furniture, it was a stage on which the drama of family life was played out. And the main character without a voice on this stage was the woman. In the Victorian era, the bed was the main piece of furniture in the house, a symbol of the wealth and status of the head of the family. Massive carved mahogany headboards, lush canopies, and expensive fabrics were all meant to demonstrate the husband's wealth. The woman was merely an addition to this luxury. It was in this bed that she performed her main function, as society saw it, giving birth to heirs. The bed was both the place of conception and the place of childbirth. This entire painful and risky process took place here, surrounded by relatives and midwives. This bed was also her infirmary. In an era when medicine was underdeveloped, many diseases were treated with bed rest. Women spent weeks and months in bed, fighting ailments in the same conditions that may have caused them in the first place. The bed was also a place of mourning. In those days, it was customary to lay out deceased family members for farewells right in the house, often in the bedroom. Women had to stay by the bedside of the deceased, accepting condolences and showing appropriate grief. Marital duty was another of her unquestionable responsibilities performed in this bed. Her desires and feelings were irrelevant. The bed was a symbol of her husband's power over her body. Thus, the Victorian bed was not a place of rest, but the center of a woman's universe, a universe full of duties, pain, and submission. Behind its outward splendor lay the quiet drama of a woman's lot. She was the queen of her home, but her throne was hard and cold. What if everything you've been taught about home comfort is outdated? Today we strive for minimalism. One light blanket, a couple of pillows. In the Victorian era, it was the opposite. The bed was a veritable mountain of textiles, and there were good reasons for this. Most homes did not have central heating, and fireplaces could not heat all the rooms. At night, the temperature in the bedroom could drop to almost the same as outside. The only way to keep warm was to cover yourself with numerous layers of blankets. First, a coarse bottom sheet was spread on the mattress. Then came a thinner and softer top sheet, which was tucked over the blankets. This was done so that the expensive blankets would get less dirty and need to be washed less often. Next came a layer of several woolen blankets. Their number varied depending on the season and the family's wealth. A heavy quilted cover or a down comforter was often placed on top of the blankets to provide additional insulation. This multi-layered construction was very heavy. It weighed down on the sleeper, restricting movement. Turning over under such a load was no easy task, especially for a frail woman. But the main consequence of such an abundance of bedding was the huge amount of laundry. Washing in those days was hellish work, which fell entirely on women's shoulders. It was a process that took many hours and required enormous physical effort. Water had to be brought from a well or a tap and heated on the stove in huge pots. Then the laundry was soaked, boiled, and scrubbed on a washboard with hard soap. After that, it had to be rinsed repeatedly in cold water. Thus, the mountain of blankets on a Victorian bed symbolized not only the desire for warmth, it was a direct reflection of the invisible domestic labor performed by women. Every sheet, every blanket was soaked with her sweat. Could women cope with such a workload on their own? In the cold bedrooms of the Victorian era, there was one item that was both a source of bliss and a potential threat. We are talking about the bed warmer, a simple device without which falling asleep in an icy bed would have been unthinkable. These devices were indispensable aids in the fight against the nighttime cold. The most common type was a metal warmer, similar to a large frying pan with a long handle and a lid. It was usually made of copper or brass. Hot coals from the fireplace were poured inside, the lid was tightly closed, and the warmer was placed between the sheets to warm the bed. Using such a hot water bottle required great care. If the lid was not closed tightly, a hot coal could fall out and burn the linen, which could lead to a fire. It was also necessary to ensure that the metal was not too hot and did not leave scorch marks on the fabric. A safer alternative was ceramic or stone hot water bottles, often called Victorian pigs because of their elongated shape. These vessels were filled with boiling water, tightly plugged with a cork, and placed in bed. They retained heat for a long time and were much safer than cold hot water bottles. However, there were risks involved. If the cork was not inserted tightly, boiling water could leak out and cause severe burns. Over time, cracks could appear in the ceramic, making the hot water bottle dangerous to use. For women, preparing the hot water bottle was another evening chore. They had to go to the kitchen, boil water or take coals from the cooling fireplace, fill the device, and take it to the bedroom. Often, she would warm the bed for her husband, lying down after him in the already cooling bed. These simple items show how different life was back then compared to now. What we get with one turn of the thermostat knob, warmth and comfort, was the result of daily effort and risk for them. Every evening was a little battle with the cold. Over time, these devices were replaced by rubber hot water bottles and then electric blankets. But the memory of the copper pan with coals and the ceramic pig remains as a symbol of a bygone era. They remind us of how much we take for granted. Are you ready for the shocking truth about Victorian nightlife? Before the widespread adoption of plumbing and sewage systems in homes, a nighttime trip to the toilet was a real adventure. Toilets were often located outside or in a cold outbuilding, and going there in the dark was unpleasant and unsafe. The solution to this problem was the chamber pot, or chamber vessel, as it was also known. This item was a must-have in every Victorian bedroom. It was modestly hidden under the bed or in a special nightstand. They were usually made of earthenware or porcelain. In wealthy homes, they could be real works of art, painted with floral patterns and gilded, but their function remained extremely prosaic. The presence of a chamber pot eliminated the need to leave the warm bedroom at night. This was especially important for women, children, and the elderly. However, it created another, equally unpleasant problem. The contents of the potty remained in the room until morning, emitting unpleasant odors. To combat this, the vessels were equipped with lids, but this did little to help. The air in the bedroom, where people were already afraid to open the windows because of drafts, was far from fresh. The most unpleasant part of the ritual was emptying the chamber pot in the morning. This duty fell entirely on women, the mistress of the house, or, more often, the maid. Every morning she had to take out and wash the vessels of all family members. It was hard and humiliating work. The maid had to go downstairs with the heavy vessel, pour the contents into a cesspool, and then thoroughly wash the chamber pot using sand and caustic lye. And so it was every day, without weekends or holidays. Thus, this item, designed to make life easier, became yet another symbol of social and gender inequality. The comfort of some was ensured by the humiliating labor of others, and those others were almost always women. The chamber pot is a vivid detail that shatters the romantic image of the Victorian era. It reminds us of the everyday realities of that time, of the smells and hard work that remained behind the scenes. It was an integral part of life that was not talked about in polite society. What modern-day item do you think would shock our descendants in the same way? Now that we have imagined the atmosphere in the bedroom, let's talk about the invisible neighbors with whom we had to share our beds. Are you ready to learn how the Victorians waged a never-ending war for the cleanliness of their beds? In the Victorian era, cleanliness was a real luxury, and the fight for it was a daily feat. The lack of modern detergents, hot running water, and understanding of microbiology made this struggle particularly difficult, and the bed, unfortunately, often became a battlefield with invisible enemies. Natural mattress fillings such as straw, wool, and feathers were the perfect environment for various small creatures to live in. Dust mites and other microorganisms thrived in the warm and humid environment of the bed. This was one of the causes of many ailments, which were then attributed to bad air. Keeping the bed clean was the most important task for the housewife. Bed linen was changed once a week, if possible, but it was impossible to wash the mattress and blankets themselves. They had to be regularly taken out into the sun and fresh air. It was believed that the sun and frost killed everything harmful. Therefore, on a fine day, courtyards and balconies were hung with bedding. Women beat the dust out of them with special beaters. It was hard physical work. To scare away unwanted neighbors, small bags of herbs were sewn into mattresses and between layers of linen. Lavender, tansy, and wormwood were used. It was believed that their pungent smell repelled pests. Wooden bed frames also required care. Insects could settle in the cracks and joints. Therefore, beds were regularly dismantled, and all parts were washed with hot water, soap, and lye, and sometimes even treated with turpentine. For women, this endless war for hygiene was yet another area of responsibility. Cleanliness in the home, and especially in the bed, was considered an indicator of her diligence as a housewife. If pests infested the house, it was a disgrace that fell on her. This created constant stress. Women lived in a state of perpetual tension, examining sheets and looking for the slightest signs of uncleanliness. Their peace of mind depended on whether they could win this daily battle. It is important to understand that this was not a matter of sloppiness. Even in the cleanest homes, despite all efforts, it was virtually impossible to completely get rid of this problem. The level of hygiene at that time simply did not allow it. The struggle for clean bedding was part of the overall struggle for survival. In an era when any scratch could lead to infection and epidemics claimed thousands of lives, hygiene was a matter of life and death. And at the forefront of this struggle, as always, was the woman. Modern pajamas or nightgowns are designed for comfort. They are light, loose, and do not restrict movement. Victorian nightwear served completely different purposes. Its main task was to keep the wearer warm and maintain modesty, with comfort being the last consideration. Women slept in long, floor-length nightgowns made of cotton or flannel. They were completely shapeless, with long sleeves and high-closed collars. Such clothing completely concealed the body in accordance with the strict moral standards of the time. These shirts were not only modest but also warm. In cold bedrooms, they served as an extra layer of insulation. Sometimes a special quilted jacket was worn over the shirt to protect the chest and back from the cold. Men's nightwear was similar to women's. It also consisted of a long shirt, sometimes complemented by trousers. The main difference was a mandatory accessory, a nightcap. The nightcap was not just a funny detail of the wardrobe, it served an important function. It protected the head from the cold. It was believed that most of the heat escapes through the head, so sleeping without a cap was unwise. Women also often covered their heads at night. They wore bonnets or tucked their hair under a net. This was done not only for warmth, but also to preserve their elaborate hairstyles until morning. All this nightwear was quite cumbersome. It restricted movement during sleep. Imagine what it was like to sleep in a long shirt, a cap, and under a pile of heavy blankets. Washing these items also added to the housewife's workload. White cotton shirts had to be not only washed, but also bleached, boiled, and starched. Keeping them in perfect condition required a lot of effort. Nightwear was another manifestation of society's total control over the body, especially the female body. Even in her sleep, a woman had to look decent and modest. Her body was hidden under layers of fabric, as were her true feelings and desires. These clothes, like the entire bedroom setting, were not designed for women, but to comply with external rules. Her personal comfort was not taken into account. She was merely an object that had to fit into the strict framework of Victorian morality. Nighttime in the Victorian era was truly dark. Electricity had not yet entered every home, and gas lighting was expensive and not available to everyone. The main sources of light were candles and kerosene lamps. When darkness fell, life in the house came to a standstill. It was dangerous to move around the rooms without light. Therefore, when people went to bed, they were effectively isolated in their rooms until morning. This darkness gave rise to many fears. People were afraid not only of robbers, but also of supernatural forces. The silence of the night was broken only by the creaking of floorboards and the howling of the wind, which stirred the imagination. The night air was particularly frightening. According to the prevailing miasmatic theory at the time, diseases spread through harmful vapors and mists that condensed at night. Therefore, the windows in the bedrooms were tightly closed, despite the stuffiness. As a result, the air in the room became stale and heavy. It was difficult to breathe in a room where a chamber pot stood until morning and several people slept. But the fear of miasmas was stronger than the discomfort. For women, this atmosphere was particularly oppressive. During the day, they were surrounded by work and people, but at night they were left alone in a dark, stuffy room with their thoughts and anxieties. This was a time when their loneliness was particularly acute. The lack of light made her vulnerable. If a child fell ill at night or she herself felt unwell, calling for help was a real problem. She had to find matches in complete darkness, light a candle, and risk starting a fire. Many women suffered from insomnia and nightmares. Constant nervous tension, physical fatigue, and the oppressive atmosphere in the bedroom did not contribute to healthy sleep. But it was not customary to complain about this. It was believed that a woman should be strong and patient. Her fears and anxieties were considered a sign of weakness. Therefore, she silently endured her night vigils, greeting the morning with a tired face. Thus, the night was not a time of rest and recuperation, but another ordeal. Darkness, stuffiness, and fear turned the bedroom from a refuge into a trap. This was another invisible side of Victorian women's lives, hidden behind tightly drawn curtains. In summary, it is safe to say that the Victorian bedroom was a mirror reflecting the position of women in society. Every object and every ritual associated with sleep emphasized her subordinate role. It was a space where her comfort and personal needs were ignored. The hard, uncomfortable mattress symbolized the harsh fate that required her endurance and patience. She had to endure hardships without complaint, just as she endured the discomfort of her bed. Her body had to adapt, not demand comfort. The mountain of heavy blankets and the difficulty of caring for them represented the burden of housework that weighed on her shoulders. She was the keeper of warmth and comfort, but the price of that comfort was high, her own exhausting labor. Caring for others was her primary and only function. The dangerous hot water bottle and the unpleasant chamber pot reminded her that even basic comforts came at the cost of risk and humiliating work. And this work, as the dirtiest and most thankless, always fell to women. She was an invisible cog in the machinery of domestic life. The closed, unventilated room was a metaphor for her social isolation. Her world was limited to the house, and her bedroom was the smallest and most stuffy part of it. She was locked within the confines of propriety and expectations, as if in a room without fresh air. Even the luxurious carved bed was not her property, but a symbol of her husband's status. She was merely a decoration on this bed, part of the interior, a beautiful object. Her personality and individuality dissolved into the splendor of her surroundings. Night clothes that hid her body symbolized the suppression of her sensuality and physicality. Society saw her not as a woman, but as a function, a wife and mother. Her body belonged to her husband and future children, but not to herself. Thus, night in a Victorian bed was not rest for a woman. It was a continuation of her daytime service. Falling asleep did not free her from her shackles, but only replaced them with others, invisible ones. The entire bedroom environment was created by men and for men. The comfort and peace of the head of the family came first. Women were merely a means to achieve this comfort, and their own well-being was not taken into account. After spending a night in such a bed, a modern person would probably feel exhausted. Victorian women felt this way every night, and this was only a small part of the price they paid for the right to be called angels of the hearth. We have taken a trip into the past and spent an imaginary night in a Victorian bed. Now we can see that behind the romantic aura of the era lay a harsh reality. Hard mattresses, cold rooms, and difficult living conditions were the norm for millions of people. This story is not only about discomfort, but also about incredible strength of spirit, especially among women. They not only survived in these conditions, but also created comfort, raised children, and supported their families. Their silent daily feat deserves a no less respect than the loud achievements of the men of that era. A modern comfortable bed is not just a piece of furniture. It is the result of a long evolution, technological progress, and, equally important, changing social roles. Today we have the right to rest and personal space, and this right should be cherished. What other aspects of life in the past do you think we tend to idealize, forgetting about the everyday difficulties? Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new research into the hidden sides of history.